Every Space Marine chapter ranked. 1,000 chapters. One ranking. And everyone's going to be furious. The Adeptus Astartes, humanity's greatest warriors. Genetically engineered demigods wrapped in armor that looks like someone strapped a cathedral to a tank and taught it to kill. Each chapter carries 10,000 years of bloodshed, glory, and shame burned into their history. 10,000 years of crusades, last stands, desperate victories, and catastrophic defeats. 10,000 years of service to an emperor who hasn't spoken a word since before most civilizations in the galaxy even existed. But here's the heresy nobody wants to admit. Not all Space Marines are created equal. Some chapters have shaped the fate of the entire galaxy. Their names echo through the halls of the Imperial Palace itself. Their battle honors fill libraries. Their heroes have killed gods, broken demon princes, and held the line when holding the line meant the difference between humanity's survival and total extinction. Others have accomplished precisely nothing except dying badly in conflicts nobody remembers. Today, the reckoning arrives. Every single chapter ranked from pathetic to legendary. And before the hate mail starts flooding in, understand something. This isn't about which chapter looks coolest. This isn't about whose color scheme you painted your army. This is about what these warriors have actually done across 10 millennia of constant, unrelenting war. Picture the scene. Ranks upon ranks of power-armored giants stretching toward a horizon that doesn't exist. Every conceivable color scheme represented. Chapter banners snapping in winds from 1,000 different war zones across 1,000 different worlds. The blue and gold Ultramarines stand at the fore, their gene legacy spread across hundreds of successor chapters like a corporate franchise of transhuman murder. Behind them, the crimson fury of the Blood Angels, cursed warriors fighting their own DNA while they fight the enemies of mankind. The shadowed green of the Dark Angels, keeping secrets so dark that the Inquisition itself doesn't know what they're hiding. The silver and black of the Iron Hands, more machine than flesh, replacing their weakness with blessed metal. Each chapter represents a unique interpretation of what it means to be posthuman, to be a weapon forged in the Emperor's image, to be a monster created to fight monsters. But this isn't a celebration. This is a judgment. Following the Horus Heresy, when half the Space Marine legions turned traitor and nearly destroyed everything humanity had built, Roboute Guilliman shattered the surviving Loyalist legions into roughly 1,000 chapters of approximately 1,000 warriors each, a safeguard, a failsafe. Never again would any single commander wield enough Space Marines to threaten the Imperium itself. 10,000 years later, that number has fluctuated through wars of extinction, founding events that created new chapters from existing gene seed, and chapters that simply vanished into the void without explanation or memorial. The ranking methodology demands explanation before the bloodletting begins. Chapters will be evaluated across multiple criteria: combat accomplishments that actually mattered, impact on galactic history that actually changed something, unique tactical doctrines that set them apart from the screaming masses of ceramite and fury, gene seed purity, or at least interesting impurity, heroic figures who did more than just die heroically, and critically, whether they've done anything actually memorable in the lore. A chapter that's existed for 10 millennia without a single notable battle, character, or contribution to the setting. There's no glory here. This means uncomfortable truths must be confronted. The Ultramarines, despite endless mockery as vanilla Space Marines, have shaped more galactic events than any other chapter. Their Primarch literally rewrote the Imperium's governmental structure and currently serves as its Lord Commander. Meanwhile, chapters that fans obsess over may rank lower than expected, because looking cool doesn't compensate for millennia of mediocrity. Controversy is inevitable. Placing the Dark Angels above the Space Wolves will ignite one faction. Ranking the Black Templars below a first founding chapter will enrage another. Every placement represents a thesis about what makes a Space Marine chapter matter. The Emperor's Angels of Death await judgment. 1,000 chapters. One definitive ranking. And the carnage begins at the bottom. The ranking opens in the graveyard of ambition. This is the absolute bottom of the barrel. The tiers of obscurity reserved for chapters so thoroughly unremarkable that their existence serves primarily as evidence that a Games Workshop writer in 1993 needed to fill a background table in an old codex. These are the chapters whose entire lore consists of a color scheme, a vague homeworld description, and maybe a single, soul-crushingly generic paragraph about honoring the Emperor through martial excellence. Truly inspiring stuff. At the absolute bottom, in the sediment of failure, we find chapters that achieved a kind of negative distinction. They failed so spectacularly that their failure itself became their only memorable characteristic. The Astral Claws, before their glorious rebranding as the Red Corsairs, earned their infamy through the Badab War. Their chapter master, Luft Huron, let his ambition get the better of him, and in a fit of cosmic stupidity, dragged an entire sector and a dozen other Space Marine chapters into a civil war that ended with him as a mutilated Chaos Lord. But here's the thing. At least they did something. At least their failure had scale. At least they had a story. Below them languish the truly forgotten. Chapters like the Emperor's Swords, the Iron Lords, the Star Scorpions, and dozens of others whose greatest accomplishment is appearing in a single sentence of a single sourcebook published decades ago, never to be heard from again. Their banners are dust. Their heroes are non-existent. Their deeds are a blank page. This tier establishes a crucial, brutal distinction. Existence does not equal merit. The Imperium may maintain records of approximately 1,000 active chapters, but the vast, overwhelming majority of them exist purely as background decoration. They are names on a spreadsheet. Their gene seed flows from one of the 9 loyalist Primarchs. Their warriors presumably fight and die in the Emperor's name, but their stories have never been told because, frankly, there is nothing interesting to tell. A chapter that has fought in the same grinding, anonymous campaigns as everyone else, maintained the same standards as everyone else, and produced no exceptional heroes, no legendary traitors, and no galaxy-altering events earns no recognition here. They are competent, and in this ranking, competence is damnation. This is where we find the chapters that squandered their potential. The Executioners, for example, successors of the Imperial Fists, they have a reputation for brutal, savage combat doctrines and a name that promises visceral action. Yet, they have remained perpetually sidelined in the lore, always mentioned in the background of major campaigns, but never central to them. They're the opening act that never got to headline. Or consider the Red Talons, successors of the Iron Hands. They inherited one of the most distinctive gene seed lineages in the entire Imperium, the cold, logical fury of Ferrus Manus, and proceeded to do absolutely nothing memorable with it. These chapters had every opportunity to matter, and they simply didn't. And that's the difference between being obscure and being a failure. Some chapters are obscure because Games Workshop hasn't explored them yet. They are a blank canvas, potential waiting to be realized. Others are obscure because exploration revealed nothing worth developing. The Marines Errant are the poster children for this. They have appeared in multiple sources across decades of publication, yet they remain stubbornly, fundamentally uninteresting, despite repeated opportunities to be cool. That's not bad luck. That's a foundational lack of a distinctive character. Finally, This tier addresses the uncomfortable subject of chapters that exist primarily as jokes or Easter eggs. The Rainbow Warriors, whose name alone provokes snickers. The Angry Marines, a fan-created joke whose sheer meme force propelled them into a state of semi-canon, but who remain a parody. These chapters occupy the ranking's foundations not through any fault of their own, but because the setting itself never treated them as anything more than filler. But this examination of the lowest tiers isn't just mockery. By establishing what doesn't work, what makes a chapter forgettable, what squanders potential, what marks the difference between a name on a list and a genuine presence in the lore, the criteria for excellence become crystal clear. The chapters that rise above this morass of mediocrity did so by choosing distinction. They developed characteristics that demanded attention. They participated in events that shaped the galaxy rather than merely being swept along by them. The ascent begins here, in the dust. Rising from the graveyard of ambition, the ranking now encounters the chapters that solved the problem of distinction. They did it through radical specialization, carving out niches so narrow and so specific that they became unmistakable. But this identity came at a steep price. These chapters traded versatility for a powerful, singular identity, becoming the Imperium's ultimate answer to very specific problems, while remaining almost useless for everything else. The Exorcists chapter exemplifies this tier perfectly. Their entire existence, their very reason for being, revolves around demonic possession. But they aren't just hunters. In a ritual of unimaginable horror and willpower, every single exorcist neophyte is deliberately possessed by a demon, and then, if they survive, forcibly exorcised. This spiritual scarring renders them uniquely, almost completely, resistant to the temptations and corruptions of chaos. It's a fascinating, terrifying concept that makes them the single most valuable asset during a demonic incursion. The problem? When the war is against orcs, or tyrannids, or a human rebellion, they are just another Space Marine chapter, their greatest strength rendered utterly irrelevant. Their specialization grants them automatic distinction, but it also locks them into a single narrative box. The Carcharodon's Astra, the Space Sharks, occupy similar territory, though they achieved it through different means. Operating from the lightless void of the galactic fringe, they exist in a state of perpetual, nomadic crusade. Over millennia, they have developed a reputation for savage, near-feral combat that borders on the disturbing even by the bloody standards of the Adeptus Astartes. Their warriors have corpse-pale skin and dead, black eyes. They move with an unnatural silence before erupting into violence that makes other chapters deeply uncomfortable. This gives them instant recognizability. They are the Imperium's boogeymen, the monsters that hunt monsters. But that very identity is a cage. They are forever the creepy fringe dwellers, and any story about them must, by necessity, be about their specific brand of brutality. This tier is defined by this gift and curse. The Raptors chapter, for instance, are renowned for their shockingly pragmatic approach to warfare. They actually use cover. They actually employ camouflage. They actually engage in reasonable modern military tactics rather than screaming their name and charging directly into a wall of enemy fire. They have earned a devoted fanbase precisely because they contrast so sharply with standard Space Marine absurdity. Yet, that very contrast requires the existence of that absurdity to function. The Raptors matter because other chapters are glorious, head-butting morons. Without that context, they're just competent soldiers. Then there are the Mortifactors, perhaps the most extreme example of niche distinction. Their obsession with death, their bone-white, skull-decorated armor, their ritualistic cannibalism of fallen enemies. These characteristics make them impossible to confuse with any other chapter. But those same traits make them difficult to feature in any narrative that doesn't center on their bizarre death cult practices. A story about the mortifactors fighting orcs inevitably becomes a story about how weirdly the mortifactors fight orcs. Some chapters found their specialization not by choice, but by circumstance. The Lamenters, cursed by their blood angel's gene seed to suffer perpetual, almost comical misfortune, have become the setting's designated cosmic punching bags. Every single appearance they make in the lore involves them suffering some new, soul-crushing catastrophe. Destroyed companies, doomed crusades, allies who betray them at the last second. Their specialization is being unlucky, and while this generates tremendous sympathy from fans, it also constrains their narrative role to one of perpetual victimhood. The most successful chapters at this tier are those that found a way to make their specialization essential rather than limiting. The Mantis Warriors, with their emphasis on guerrilla tactics and sudden ambush-style strikes, carved out a niche that remains useful across countless campaign types. The Nova Marines, with their legendary fortress-building expertise, positioned themselves as invaluable whenever a defensive line must be held. These chapters turned a narrow focus into broad applicability, a feat that not every specialized chapter managed to achieve. The Second Founding was one of the most consequential moments in Space Marine history. The shattering of the original, continent-spanning legions into 1,000 independent chapters after the Horus Heresy's fires cooled. But while every single one of these Second Founding chapters carries the prestigious gene seed of a Primarch, not all of them managed to leverage that heritage into anything resembling distinction. This tier of the ranking examines the successors who managed to step out from their progenitor's colossal shadow and those who remain forever lost within it. The Crimson Fists command immediate attention as a chapter that built a genuine, independent identity. Despite sharing Rogel Dorn's gene seed with the legendary Imperial Fists, the Crimson Fists forged their own legend, not through stoic defense, but through catastrophic, near-total destruction and the stubborn will to survive. When a faulty missile defense system detonated in their own armory, the explosion ripped the heart out of their fortress monastery on Rin's world. The vast majority of the chapter was annihilated in a single, fiery moment, just as a massive orc "Wah!" descended upon the planet. But from that ash, the survivors transformed tragedy into myth. The image of Chapter Master Pedro Cantor, his power fist still smoking, leading a shattered remnant of his brothers through enemy-held territory to reach the capital city, created a narrative of endurance and defiance entirely distinct from their parent chapter. They are not defined by a wall they held, but by a home they lost and fought tooth and nail to reclaim. The Flesh-Tearers occupy fascinating territory as successors who became more notable than their stable peers by fully embracing their gene curse. Every successor of the Blood Angels struggles with the black rage and the red thirst, the degenerative psychic echo and vampiric hunger that threatens to turn them into berserk monsters. Most successors try to control these impulses, to hold them back with discipline and art. The Flesh-Tearers surrendered to them. They developed a reputation for savagery so extreme that other Imperial forces actively fear serving alongside them. Their chain axes are never clean. Their armor is perpetually gore-splattered. Their distinction came through becoming the most cursed, the most dangerous. The successors that other Blood Angels' descendants look upon with grim concern. This comparison is instructive. Successful successor chapters found a way to be different from their progenitors, not simply smaller, less important versions. The Nova Marines, despite their second founding pedigree and their direct Ultramarines lineage, never developed a significant identity of their own. They are known for their skill in fortress construction and little else, a mere footnote to their parent chapter's sprawling glory. Meanwhile, the Black Templars, also second founding, also Imperial Fist's successors, became arguably more famous than any other non-first founding chapter in existence. They did this through their eternal crusade, their zealous, almost fanatical faith, and their outright rejection of the Codex Astartes' limitations on chapter size. They didn't just replicate their progenitors' approach, they carved a new path. The Soul Drinkers deserve particular examination as a cautionary tale of this independence taken too far. Their fierce determination to forge their own destiny, to serve the spirit of the Emperor rather than the suffocating bureaucracy of the Imperium, led them down a winding road of increasing isolation. A dispute with the Mechanicum over an artifact escalated until they found themselves labeled excommunicate traitors, hunted by their former brothers. Their story demonstrates that distinction carries profound risks, that standing apart from your progenitor chapter can mean standing apart from the Imperium itself. This also reveals the phenomenon of successors who became more beloved by fans than their progenitors. The Lamenters, though a later founding, illustrate this dynamic perfectly. Their perpetual misfortune and doomed heroism generates more raw emotional investment than the relatively stable Blood Angels proper, the Celestial Lions, victims of inquisitorial treachery that nearly wiped them out, command a fierce loyalty from fans who appreciate a noble underdog. These chapters succeeded by finding emotional niches their progenitors couldn't occupy. The Second Founding's legacy proves that gene seed alone guarantees nothing. Legend is built through choice, through catastrophe, and through a deliberate, often painful differentiation from one's origins. The most successful successors honored their heritage while refusing to be defined entirely by it. Every Space Marine chapter proclaims eternal loyalty to the Emperor. Their banners are stitched with oaths, their armor engraved with promises of fidelity. Yet the Imperium's history is littered with the shattered standards of chapters that broke that faith, through corruption, through madness, through circumstances that twisted protectors into predators. This tier of the ranking examines those whose fame derives entirely from how spectacularly they failed, and asks whether infamy can constitute its own form of dark distinction. The Soul Drinker's trajectory demands examination as a perfect case study in gradual, tragic corruption. They began as loyal Imperial Fist successors, paragons of stubborn virtue, but their refusal to accept the authority of the Adeptus Mechanicus over a recovered holy artifact triggered a chain of events that could not be stopped. What started as principled defiance spiraled into excommunication. Hunted by the Imperium they still sought to serve, they were twisted by the mutating influence of chaos, a power they never bowed to but could not understand. They grew claws and chitinous plates, their forms warping into monstrous parodies of Astartes, yet they never stopped believing they were loyal. Their story ends in their ultimate destruction, fighting against the very forces they had inadvertently served. Their failure wasn't a simple fall to chaos. It was the tragedy of warriors who could not navigate the impossible gap between serving humanity and serving its suffocating institutions. The astral claws provide a much cleaner, more classical case of raw ambition corrupting purpose. Chapter Master Lufkthuron was not a tragic victim of circumstance. He was an architect of his own damnation. His determination to expand his chapter beyond the limits of the Codex Astartes, to build an independent empire in the Maelstrom rather than serve the one on Terra, triggered the Badab War. It was a vicious, grinding civil war that saw a dozen loyal chapters deployed to put down Huron's rebellion. His transformation into Huron Blackheart, the blood-handed pirate king of the Red Corsairs, represents one of the most complete falls from grace in post-heresy history. The astral claws matter precisely because their corruption felt so plausible. Huron's initial goals weren't entirely unreasonable, his grievances not entirely unfounded. His path to damnation was paved with decisions that each seemed defensible in isolation, until the destination was revealed to be hell. This confronts an uncomfortable truth. Infamous chapters often achieve a far greater narrative presence than their loyal equivalents. The Night Lords, though a traitor legion, demonstrate this principle perfectly. Their atmospheric horror, their use of psychological warfare, their descent from brutal justice bringers into sadistic terrorizers, makes them infinitely more compelling than countless loyalist chapters combined. Infamy generates stories that simple, steadfast loyalty cannot. The Relictors exemplify a different category of failure entirely, a chapter destroyed by the Imperium not for falling to chaos, but for attempting to use chaos against itself. Their core belief was that demon weapons and chaotic artifacts could be wielded by sufficiently pure and strong-willed warriors, turning the enemy's greatest power back on them. For this, they were declared excommunicate traitorous and hunted to extinction, despite never actually pledging allegiance to the ruinous powers. Theirs was a philosophical failure, not a moral one. They were destroyed for a heresy of method, not of allegiance. So the ranking must grapple with how to position these fallen chapters. The Astral Claws, objectively, had a greater impact on galactic history than dozens of obscure loyalist chapters who maintained perfect fidelity while achieving nothing. The Soul Drinker's narrative arc contains more drama and more memorable moments than chapters that served faithfully for 10,000 years without a single notable incident. Does accomplishment in villainy count for more than mediocrity in loyalty? The answer is nuanced. Fallen chapters earn recognition for their impact, for the wars they caused, the legends they spawned, the cautionary tales they provided. But that recognition is forever marked with disgrace. A chapter that burns gloriously and falls spectacularly does not rank above one that maintained its honor through millennia of meaningful conflict. But they may well rank above a chapter that maintained its honor while accomplishing precisely nothing. Infamy is not fame, but in a galaxy where millions die in anonymous conflicts, being remembered for anything at all is its own grim distinction. Between the extremes of glorious legend and spectacular failure, there exists a tier of chapters that embody a different kind of greatness: quiet, sustained excellence. These are the warriors who have defended humanity across 10,000 years without the operatic disasters or galaxy-shaking triumphs that generate headlines. This tier honors the chapters whose distinction lies not in a single, blinding moment of glory, but in the accumulated weight of millennia of reliable, unwavering service. The Salamanders occupy a unique position as arguably the most humane chapter in a setting defined by its absolute lack of humanity. Their entire philosophy, the Promethean Creed, emphasizes the protection of civilians over the pursuit of glory, self-sacrifice over self-aggrandizement. They maintain a connection to the population of their homeworld, Nocturne, that most other chapters would dismiss as a dangerous, sentimental weakness. In any other story, the Salamanders would be the uncomplicated heroes. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, they are radicals, space marines who treat ordinary, fragile humans as people worth protecting, not just an acceptable loss in the equation of war. Their distinction lies not in a list of spectacular victories, but in the countless millions of lives saved by their stubborn insistence that collateral damage matters. The White Scars represent excellence through a different lens, the sheer mastery of their specialized craft. Wielding lightning warfare as an art form, Their culture is drawn from the tribal traditions of their homeworld, Chogoris, and they refuse to ever be pinned down in a static defense. The roar of their bike engines is the thunder before a storm that breaks and vanishes in an instant. But unlike the over-specialized chapters of the lower tiers, the White Scar's doctrine of mobility enhances their effectiveness rather than limiting it. They found their distinction in how they fight, without sacrificing the ability to fight absolutely anywhere against any foe. This is what separates these noble defenders from the merely competent. The Imperial Fists, the legacy of Rogal Dorn himself, exemplify this through sheer, stubborn, defensive perfection. For 10,000 years, their purpose has been to hold the wall, to endure the siege, to die on their feet rather than take a single step back. Their distinction isn't glamorous. Siege warfare lacks the romantic appeal of a cavalry charge or the grim fascination of hunting demons. It is a meat grinder. But their absolute reliability across uncountable conflicts, their unyielding commitment to being the Imperium's shield, has made them indispensable to its survival. The Raven Guard offer distinction through the opposite doctrine. Where the Fists are the unbreachable fortress, the Raven Guard are the unseen dagger that ends the war before it begins. Their emphasis on stealth, sabotage, and precision strikes positions them as the Salamander's tactical opposite. Where Salamanders wade into the thick of battle to physically shield civilians from harm, the Raven Guard eliminate threats with such surgical quiet that the civilians never even know they were in danger. Their excellence lies in the enemies who never knew what destroyed them, in the victories won not with roaring bolters, but with silence. This tier also includes chapters whose nobility was forged and proven through absolute catastrophe. The scythes of the Emperor were nearly annihilated by the ravenous jaws of Tyranid Hive Fleet Kraken. Their homeworld was rendered a dead husk, their fortresses shattered, their brothers consumed. Yet they spent centuries clawing their way back from the brink of extinction, all while continuing to fulfill their duties to the Imperium. Their survival, against a foe that had specifically targeted them and ripped their chapter apart, demonstrates a form of excellence that victory statistics can never capture. They endured when endurance itself seemed impossible. These chapters prove that true distinction doesn't require tragedy, treachery, or a dramatic fall from grace. It requires consistency. In a galaxy where everything inevitably rots and falls apart, the chapters that simply hold together, that do their job, and that honor the purpose for which they were made, deserve recognition for the miracle of their stability. The Emperor's genetic engineering that created the Space Marines was a miracle of science, but it was never perfect. Baked into the very code of each Primarch's gene seed were flaws, imperfections, ticking time bombs of biology and psychology. For some chapters, these flaws are manageable quirks. For others, they are a catastrophic curse, a dark legacy that has shaped their entire identity. These are the chapters that wrestle with a corruption threatening to destroy them from within, even as they fight to protect an Imperium they are barely stable enough to serve. The Blood Angels and their successors carry what is arguably the setting's most famous and most tragic gene curse, the dual afflictions of the Black Rage and the Red Thirst. At any moment, any one of them can fall into a berserk madness, their mind shattered as they are forced to relive the final, agonizing moments of their Primarch, Sanguinius, fighting Horus at the height of the heresy. They become frothing monsters, unable to distinguish friend from foe, lost in a memory of betrayal 10,000 years old. This is compounded by the Red Thirst, a vampiric, gnawing hunger for blood that must be constantly, violently suppressed. But the Blood Angels' distinction lies not in simply having this curse. All their successors share it. It's in how they chose to manage it. They embrace staggering beauty and high art as a counterweight to their inner savagery, creating some of the Imperium's finest artisans, poets, and scholars, right alongside some of its most dangerous close combat warriors. Then you have the flesh-tearers, who represent the exact opposite approach. They looked at the curse and decided not to fight it, but to surrender to it. Their chapter master, Gabriel Seth, is a man who has done the math. He openly acknowledges that his chapter is dying, that with each passing generation more of his brothers fall to the Black Rage, and that their eventual extinction is a mathematical inevitability. And yet, they serve. They deploy their doomed warriors like a loaded gun against the Imperium's worst enemies, choosing to spend the last vestiges of their dying chapter in a final, glorious blaze of violence for humanity's defense. Their distinction is choosing to matter, despite knowing they are already dead. The Dark Angels carry a curse of a completely different nature, not biological, but historical. Their shame is a secret. Their entire legion was split during the Horus Heresy, and their pursuit of the fallen, the traitors from their own ranks who escaped judgment, has become a paranoid obsession that supersedes all other duties. The Dark Angels will abandon allies, abandon entire campaigns, abandon any and all oaths if it offers them even the slimmest chance to capture another of the fallen and silence them forever. Their curse is secrecy, a need to hide their shame so completely that they have become the Imperium's most insular and paranoid chapter, trusting no one outside their own shadowy inner circles with the truth of their legion's divided soul. This is where you see the true grimdark genius of these chapters. They weaponize their weaknesses. The Blood Angels know their warriors might fall to the Black Rage, so they form them into the Death Company, unleashing these doomed, frothing madmen as a wave of unstoppable shock troops. If you're going to fall to madness, better to fall while tearing through the enemy's command structure. The Space Wolves' Wolfen Curse, which can transform their Marines into bestial, wolf-like creatures, seems like pure degradation until you realize how terrifyingly effective that raw ferocity can be on the battlefield. Even a flaw can become a strength if you're desperate enough to use it. And then there are the Lamenters, a chapter cursed not by gene seed, not by history, but by fate itself. Their story is an unending string of cosmic bad luck. They were declared traitors during the Badab War, despite their unwavering loyalty. They were savaged by tyrannids to the point of near extinction, and they are perpetually thrown into one doomed meat grinder campaign after another. Their response to this perpetual suffering has been to just keep fighting, to keep helping those they can, despite knowing that disaster is always waiting right around the corner. They have become the single most tragic chapter in the entire setting, precisely because their curse isn't their fault, and it can never be overcome. It's just their destiny to suffer, and their nobility to endure it. A curse, in the end, is a narrative opportunity. The chapters that rank highest among the damned are those who transformed their affliction into their identity, who found a way to matter, not despite their weakness, but because of it. The first founding chapters. These are the ones who occupy the rarefied, holy territory at the top of the hierarchy. Their gene seed flows pure and unbroken from the Primarchs themselves. Their traditions don't just stretch back 10,000 years. Their legends predate the Imperium as we even know it. But this tier isn't about coasting on ancient glory. It's about which of these legendary warriors actually leveraged that heritage into genuine, undeniable greatness. And you have to start with the ones who are great, precisely because they refuse to act like it. The Space Wolves. Leman Russ's sons stand immediately, violently distinct through their complete rejection of the Codex Astartes. They don't have companies. They have great companies. They don't have standard Marines. They have blood claws and gray hunters. Their unique gene seed produces the wolfen, a curse that turns them into savage beasts, and they've maintained their brutal Viking warrior culture with a ferocity that borders on pure obstinance. They initially refused Primaris reinforcements. They refused to behave like proper Space Marines. Their entire distinction lies in being the first founding's most different chapter, the snarling wolves among the Emperor's loyal hunting hounds. Then you have the Iron Hands, who represent perhaps the most challenging and grimdark legacy of all. They are a chapter defined by the single moment of their Primarch's death. Ferrus Manus was decapitated at Istvan V, and his sons have spent the next 10 millennia trying to prove themselves worthy of a dead father they can never, ever satisfy. Their distinction lies in representing the setting's most extreme and tragic response to grief. They decided to replace it with metal. They treat feelings, emotions, and the weakness of the flesh as the ultimate enemy, something to be methodically excised and replaced with cold, hard, unfeeling logic and machinery. They don't just use cybernetics, it is their entire philosophy, a desperate attempt to amputate their own soul. These distinctions matter because they represent fundamentally different answers to the same question. What should a Space Marine be? Look at the White Scars versus the Raven Guard. Both are masters of mobile warfare, but the Scars embrace the thunderous head-on cavalry charge, a wave of steel and fury. The Raven Guard, by contrast, prefer the unseen blade, assassination, and sabotage. The Scars are a storm. The Raven Guard are the shadow that precedes it, or compare the Salamanders to the Iron Hands. Both are master artisans, but where the Salamanders forge holy weapons to protect human lives, the Iron Hands forge bionic bodies to transcend their own humanity. And you can't ignore the ones who were there for the Imperium's defining moments, the Imperial fists and their legacy of stubborn, unbreakable defense. Rogel Dorn's legion built the dam walls of the Imperial Palace. They held those walls during the Siege of Terra. That single achievement, defending the Emperor's throne from Horus himself, grants them a historical significance that sheer combat stats can never match. They were there. They held the line. The Blood Angels' position is cemented by their perfect, tragic fusion of curse and culture. Like the Iron Hands, their Primarch's death shadows every single thing they do. But where the Iron Hands responded with a cold rejection of weakness, the Blood Angels embraced staggering beauty and high art as a defiant scream against their own degradation. They create magnificent paintings, compose haunting symphonies, and craft gorgeous artifacts, not despite their curse, but because of it. They make beauty their shield and their sword against the beast that lives inside their blood. But we have to be clear. First founding status alone is not a guarantee of excellence. It's an opportunity. The Raven Guard, for all their ancient lineage and distinctive stealth tactics, have frankly featured less prominently in major galaxy-shaping events than younger chapters like the Black Templars or the Crimson Fists. Historical pedigree provides the foundation, but a chapter still has to build something on it. The greatest of the first founding are the ones who combined that heritage with 10,000 years of achievement, tradition with evolution, and ancient glory with brutal contemporary relevance. Being a son of a Primarch opens the door, but you still have to walk through it. At the ranking's absolute summit stand the chapters whose influence extends beyond the battlefield, beyond mere military victories, and into the very DNA of the Imperium itself. These chapters didn't just fight in the galaxy's most important battles. They are the ones who defined what importance even means for the Adeptus Astartes. Their removal from history wouldn't just change a few battle outcomes, it would fracture the entire setting. The Black Templars demand their place among this elite, and they do it despite being a second founding chapter. Their eternal crusade, their absolute refusal to maintain a single homeworld, has allowed them to spread their forces across countless crusading fleets. This makes them, in practice, the largest and most widespread Space Marine chapter in existence, all while technically complying with the codex they so famously despise. They didn't just go on crusades, they became a crusade, a perpetual, unending engine of zealous warfare. They defined what post-heresy crusading even looks like. The Dark Angels stand in complex, shadowed territory. As the First Legion, the very first Space Marines ever created, they carry a historical weight that even other first founding chapters cannot match. Their 10,000-year hunt for the fallen has become an obsession that has shaped their every action, their inner circle's machinations influencing imperial politics at the highest, most secret levels. But that secrecy is also their great limiter. The Dark Angels' greatest accomplishments may be things the Imperium never even learned about, their victories buried to protect their shame. Then there are the Grey Knights, an organization so secret, so specialized, that their inclusion here is almost a breach of protocol. They aren't even technically Adeptus Astartes, but a chamber militant of the Inquisition. Every single one of them is a psyker, their every battle fought against the most ruinous manifestations of chaos. Their distinction lies in fighting the wars that, by design, no one is allowed to remember. Demonic incursions that should have consumed entire sectors were contained and erased from history by their hand. Without the Grey Knights, the Imperium would have fallen to the warp 1,000 times over. The Blood Angels' case for this supreme tier rests on the shoulders of one man, Sanguinius. He was the angel, the most beloved of all the Primarchs, and his death at the hands of Horus represents the emotional, tragic climax of the entire heresy. Every Blood Angel carries that legacy, the memory of their Gene Father's ultimate sacrifice at the foot of the Emperor's throne. Their art, their curse, their desperate, beautiful nobility, it all flows from that single, mythic moment. The Blood Angels matter because Sanguinius mattered, and his story remains the Imperium's most resonant tragedy. But any argument for ultimate supremacy must, in the end, confront the Ultramarines. They are mocked endlessly as boring, as vanilla, the default Space Marines that exist only to make other, more interesting chapters look cool by comparison. And yet, they have shaped the modern Imperium more profoundly than any other chapter in history. It was their Primarch, Roboute Guilliman, who wrote the Codex Astartes, the book that defines the very organization of almost every other chapter. It was Guilliman who established the realm of Ultramar, a functional, prosperous empire within the Imperium, proving that Space Marines could build and govern, not just destroy. And now, in the Imperium's darkest hour, it is the resurrected Guilliman who serves as its Lord Commander, ruling in the Emperor's name. The comparison becomes painfully clear. The Black Templars are more zealous, the Space Wolves are more distinctive, the Blood Angels are more tragic, and the Dark Angels more mysterious. But the Ultramarines built the very framework within which all those other chapters operate. Their Primarch's Codex defines what a chapter even is. Their current leader runs the entire Imperium. Being interesting is not the same as being important. The Ultramarines' supposed boring nature is a direct consequence of their position as the setting's baseline, the standard against which all deviation is measured. That position might not be glamorous, but it is undeniably supreme. The verdicts crystallize. 1,000 chapters, evaluated across 10 millennia of accomplishment, of impact, of distinctiveness, and of their lasting contribution to the fate of the galaxy. The time for deliberation is over. Judgment is rendered. The absolute bottom of the ranking house is those chapters whose very existence registers as little more than background noise. the Emperor's swords, the Iron Lords, and the dozens of other names that appeared once in a forgotten sourcebook and never again emerged from obscurity. They may serve faithfully, they may fight bravely, and they may die honorably. But in a setting that spans 1,000,000 worlds, faithful service without distinction vanishes into the cold, hard math of galactic attrition. Rising from that dust, the specialized chapters found their place, respected for their unique purpose, but limited by their narrow applicability. The exorcists matter when demons threaten. The mortifactors matter when enemies must be psychologically shattered. But a chapter that can only matter in specific, controlled circumstances cannot rank among those who matter everywhere, all the time. Higher still, the cursed chapters occupy positions of honor, their rankings reflecting a tragic nobility. The lamenters, the flesh-tearers, the countless blood angel successors who fight their own corrupted genetics alongside the enemies of man, their constant internal struggle grants them a distinction that simple stability can never provide. Being doomed, paradoxically, has made them more memorable, more vital to the story of the 40th millennium, than being whole. The first founding chapters claim their rightful places near the summit, their ancient lineages providing the bedrock for millennia of accumulated achievement. The Space Wolves' fierce, defiant independence, the Iron Hands' cold, mechanical determination, the Salamander's impossible, burning humanity, each represents a different, powerful answer to the fundamental question of what a posthuman warrior should be. And each answer carries a weight that their successors can only ever inherit, never originate. And at the very peak, the final positions are declared. The Dark Angels, for all their history as the First Legion, rank below their most vaunted peers. Their obsessive secrecy, their endless hunt for the fallen, has consumed resources that could have better served the Imperium. Their greatest victories are unknown, their greatest sins hidden. Mystery, when it prevents transparent accomplishment, becomes a liability. The Blood Angels claim a position among the highest echelons, not for their martial prowess alone, but for their mythic resonance. The ghost of Sanguinius's sacrifice echoes through every drop of their cursed blood, and their desperate determination to create beauty while fighting their own inner beast represents the setting's most poignant and enduring tragedy. The Black Templars earn their recognition as the greatest of all successor chapters. Their eternal crusade is a testament that a second founding need not mean secondary importance. Their zealous faith and ceaseless grinding warfare have made them arguably the Imperium's most active, most visible, and most feared military force. But the supreme position, the final #1 spot, belongs inevitably and controversially to the Ultramarines. Not because they are the most interesting, not because they are the most beloved, not because their clean, classical aesthetic captures the imagination the way a space wolf's feral fury or a blood angel's tragic beauty does. The Ultramarines reign supreme because their primarch, Roboute Guilliman, wrote the very book that defined what a Space Marine chapter is in the post-Heresy era. They are supreme because their governance of the 500 worlds of Ultramar proved that Space Marines could protect and build civilization, not merely die for it. They are supreme because in the Imperium's most desperate hour since the siege of Terra itself, it was Guilliman's resurrection that placed an Ultramarine at the very helm of the Imperium. Every chapter that organizes into companies follows Guilliman's codex. Every chapter that limits its numbers to 1,000 warriors accepts his ancient framework. Every successor chapter that exists at all does so because he shattered the legions and established the very system that allows them to function. The Ultramarines are not the default by accident. They are the default because they created the template. 1,000 chapters, countless heroes, endless wars, and at the top of it all, stand the sons of Ultramar. Not because they are perfect, but because their imperfect, blue and gold standard has shaped everything that every Space Marine chapter, across 10,000 years of blood and fire, has ever been. The ranking stands. The Emperor's angels have been judged.